This week's Parsha is Parshas Va'Yigash. At the very end of this week's Parsha, at the very last verse, the Torah says, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. Israel, settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. Vayechzu ba, and they clung to it, they became permanent there. And Vayifru Vayirbu Ma'od, and they became numerous and multiplied. This verse is in the middle of a story which has nothing to do with this. It was talking about Yosef and him is buying all of the possessions and the people themselves in exchange for the granary that he had stored during the famine. And all of a sudden in the middle it says that the Jewish people, Israel, settled in Goshen. And that's it. The Parsha is over. That's, if you look inside the Torah, when there's a break, the break is right at the end of this verse. And the next paragraph, the break that's there is what's called a Parshas Stuma. It's closed on either side. There's a break in the middle of the line as opposed to when there's an opening on the side of the line. And this means something, because usually the paragraphs, when they're written in the Torah, are written with the side that's open, meaning that the last line in the previous paragraph will end in the middle of the line, and there'll be an opening at the end of the line. But here, it's closed on either side. The next paragraph starts in the same line after a certain amount of space. Why is this? So the first Rashi in next week's Parsha, in Parshas Va'Yigash2, says that when Yaakov died, which occurred at the beginning of next week's Parsha, the Jewish people's eyes and hearts were closed off from the suffering of the exile. Now, what does this mean? And why was this connected to the very last verse in the previous Parsha? The Jewish people settled in the land of Goshen, in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. So the answer is really we have to trace back our steps and understand what exile is. Avraham, Yosef's great-grandfather, was told by Hashem that for 400 years his descendants will be in exile. Now the Jewish people spent being slaves in Egypt for only 210 years. So how do we get to the number 400? So from the time that Yitzchak was born, that would be Avram's son, Yosef's grandfather, that is 400 years until the Jewish people were redeemed from their enslavement in Egypt. That's how you get to that number of 400 years. You may ask, so if the Jewish people were not enslaved, what type of exile is that? And they were living in the land of Israel for all that time. The answer is that the Jewish people understood, well, the Jewish people was really just Yitzchak and Yaakov, that even though they lived in the land of Israel, it was not theirs. And that in and of itself, the fact that it wasn't their inheritance yet, that in and of itself caused them tremendous pain. They felt that the land has not reached its potential. And that itself, even though they were physically on the land, caused them tremendous pain. They felt the pain of the exile. When the Jewish people descended to Egypt, when Yaakov and his children descended to Egypt because of necessity, there was no food in Israel, even though they descended because they needed to descend, nonetheless, once they got there, they still had to feel that pain. In an alien land, they had to feel like they were in a land that was not theirs, that they had not an inheritance, and feel the pain of the lack of the holiness that was in Israel, or that could be in Israel, the potential of what the land of Israel could hold. And that the Jewish people became desensitized to. And that is what this last verse in Parshas Va'Yigash is referring to. It says, Vayeshev Yisrael. The Jewish people settled in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. They become settled. They've built, the commentators say they built palaces. They started buying land and buying houses. They started making it where they live, their settlement, their inheritance. And they forgot about the fact that the land of Israel was their true inheritance. At that point, when they became desensitized from the pain and suffering of what exile is, Hashem had to affirmatively take action to give them the pain, to show them the pain by enslaving them to Paro. And that is why this very last verse in this week's Parsha is referring to the settling of the Jewish people in the land of Goshen. And that's the reason why also the next Parsha is a closed-off Parsha, and that's a reference to the fact that the Jewish people's eyes and ears and hearts were closed off from the pain and suffering of the exile. Just a quick question, in this very last verse it also says that the Jewish people settled in the land of Goshen, in the land of Egypt. What does that mean? Why doesn't it just say in the land of Goshen? We referred to Goshen before, we know it's in the land of Egypt, or just refer to the land of Egypt. One or the other, why say both? And also the order is strange. Usually we say in the land of Goshen and the land of Egypt. Instead it says in the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen. Have a good Shabbos.